Tonight's class is about energy and magic. One of the first things in magic, go back to the ancient Egyptians. And a lot of you have heard, I may have mentioned this even in class, I'm not sure, but in ancient Egypt, where magic was very important, they understood that magic was understanding the nature of things and how to work with them. All magic is. A stage magician is a good magician because he understands how the eye sees and what mirrors do. He understands that. The one who manipulates is good because he understands how to manipulate. And again, he understands what we do and don't see, things like this. So because of their understanding of what they're doing and the development of it, they are true magicians. So is the mechanic that does a good job on your car. He's truly a magician. It's more than just training. It goes beyond training. It is the ability to understand what you're working with or what you're doing. The good cook is a magician. Many people are magicians in the sense that the ancient world thought of it. And one of the first things that the Egyptians said was their entire language was designed so that the picture described a thing accurately and the sound that they gave to things accurately described the nature of things. Now, I'm not sure if I showed you. I will show you a really simple form. Michael may, or I may have, because I never know what I'm repeating because I teach these classes over and over. So I'm never sure which I've told what class. Did we show you the glyphs at all? For instance, they have a glyph. And that's a heart. It's a 3-valve organ. That does not look like a heart. That looks like a heart. It was accurately drawn, and they, learning to work with nature, with the world, with everything, began with sound to do the same thing that we did with the picture here of accurately describing something. I can't pronounce the sounds that they made in the language, so I'm not even going to try. They had sounds we don't have, whistles and clicks included, and they didn't use certain sounds that we do. There wasn't really an R sound as we have it. Pardon me, there wasn't a J, there was an R, there was not a J sound. The closest they came to a J was like a CH sound. So my name in Egyptian would come out closer to cherry than Jared. Anyway, this is one picture. And the other thing which I'm going to draw is all by itself a spine or backbone. And it means spine or backbone if they have a little figure that says this is literally what we're talking about. But if it is not, then it means expansion. And when they put these two together, most translators, Germans, etc., translate that as joy. Expansion of the heart is joy. Now that's taken from a very modern understanding of what the heart is. But that's not what the heart was to the ancient Egyptians. Fascinatingly enough, over and over, the people in their prayers and the things that were inscribed in stone asked for their ruler to have this expansion of the heart. They weren't asking for him to be happy. They were asking for him to have wisdom. Because the Egyptians said that the brain can tell you what you can do, but only the heart can tell you what you should do. And when you read the Bible, for years, I don't know why, they just give you different versions rather than when you're in Sunday school. So I thought Solomon asked for wisdom for that word. But actually what he asked for was an understanding heart. And that's exactly what that is. Whether it was the ancient Egyptians or Solomon. Okay, does that make sense? I showed you that because I want you to understand that to them, The sound of something carried the meaning or what it was. And that was where we began to get the idea that if someone knows your name, they have power over you, we say, but it's not necessarily power over you. They have the power to understand what to do to move you. They have the power to work with you. Doesn't mean somebody just by knowing your name can take control of you. But by knowing your name, by knowing your nature, they can more effectively work with you, and if you allow them to, they can certainly manipulate you. From that, we have organizations today that give secret names and say, don't let anybody know your name, because if they know your name, they'll have power over you. Well, knowing a name that is not associated with the very nature of who you are doesn't give anybody anything. It's a misunderstanding of that ancient idea. It is, if someone knows the nature of who you are, that gives them power to work with you. And to the extent you give it away, the other. Now, if you believe that somebody knowing your name has power over you, you've conferred it by that belief. But it's not inherent in the knowing, okay? And that's the kind of thing magic is about. It's understanding what really is going on. By the way, my eye's driving me crazy because I managed to get into poison ivy this week, and that's where it's coming out.
Yet again.
Oh, yeah, so it's getting better, but see, we're working at healing. It's a lot better than it was. I always have to find out that I have it before I can do anything about it, though. And I'm a little dense, I don't usually realize it until it's a full-blown something. All right. One of the first things then that is very important is to understand your name and what it means. Because you've been given a name, and that name has a meaning. And it carries with it an essence. I used to think people were given names willy-nilly. The more I have taught classes in numerology, the more certain I am that our names are not just selected by our parents, but somehow or other they are pushed one way or another to give us the names we have. I mean, I got mine in a strange way, and even that makes sense. My mother was in her 30s, my mother and father were both in their 30s. I was their only child, they were both attorneys. And they had a friend who was an attorney who was not married, who did not intend to get married, but he wanted someone named after him. So when my mother was pregnant, he would simply go, how's little Jerry? And pretty soon all of their friends were calling me Jerry before I was born. So when I was born, it was just sort of accepted that that's who I was. And the fascinating thing is I never met the men in my life. But that's where I got my name. And I didn't get it as a girl's name, I got it as a boy's name, which has a totally different meaning than if I had gotten it as a girl's name. Anyway, so we're going to find out your name. So I've got all these books about names. And there's only one name that I know is absolutely wrong in these books, and that's the name Mary, because they don't go back far enough. Because the name Mary, the sound Mary, in ancient Egypt, and they, remember, they understood the nature expressed by the sound was right, and the name Mary meant love or beloved, not bitter, which is what this goes back to the Jewish and says. So Mary means love or beloved. Now then, your name is, again, right. I'll start with little G's. It would be coming from the Old Welsh, meaning dweller in a valley or glen. Do you have another name? Yes. That carries power too. I always want to know what my children's names meant before I named them. And that's from the Hebrew, and it means lily or graceful lily. So I guess you're the lily of the valley. And you're Nick. Finally remember bring somebody after, it's long enough, right? I've known you long enough to think I would. This is the second time around for them with this class. Oh, I'm not going to find you the girls' names. Yours is from the Greek, and it means victorious army or victorious people. What, do you know the name?
It would be Demosthenes.
Demosthenes?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's in here, but we'll see. If it's not in here, it might be one of the others. Do you know what it means?
All I know it was the name of a philosopher.
Right. What was that? Let me look up a lot of books.
Of course.
Since this is very important, now if they named you Demetrius, I know, but Demosthenes, I haven't found so
Yeah, that's
far.
his son's name.
Huh?
That's my son's
Do
name.
you know what it means? I just
He
said I
said
could.
fertile. Fertility is what he said. I don't know. He was talking to me.
Its follower of Demeter is what it means.
It was right. God, Zeus's.
But she was the goddess of birth and the stars.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't she?
I hope you all don't mind my taking this time, because I think it's important to know what your name means.
She made the mind to bury him.
Good heavens. Here, look in this and see if you can find it. You can look here. I'll assign you to any names we don't have. All right. And your name is,
Amber.
yes. And we know what that is. Amber is a thing. So you know your name from that.
I don't like being a thing.
Oh, it's a lovely thing. Did you know amber is a very special stone? It's supposed to have very spiritual and magical powers. Did you know that?
No.
Oh, yes. It was one of the first things I discovered that's recognized as very special, particularly when it is given to you by someone else. And as your name, it was. It means the amber jewel. So you have a very nice name. But your second name?
Lee. Leigh. I don't know if the spelling has any bearing on it.
Probably not too much, actually.
You're not in here. No.
That means weary one.
Oh, that's right.
Or, wait a minute. Or it means from the pasture meadow, depending upon which route you think you're getting it from. Probably from the pasture meadow because of the spelling. All right? Name?
Paul.
Right. See, you people expect me to remember it's terrible, and I apologize, or maybe I don't apologize, it's just me. That's all there is to it. That means little. Your other name?
Matthew.
Matthew means gift of God.
That's a nice name. Gift of Jehovah. So you're a little gift of God. Name?
Ron.
Do any of you already know your names? What they mean? You do. It probably, if you're going back to the Old Norse, it means mighty power, and if you're going back to the Old English, it means son of mighty power. Was it actually Ron, or is that from a longer name?
That's from Ronald.
Then that means mighty power. Okay. A second name?
Earl.
Probably just means that, an earl. Some sort of lord. Nobleman or chief. Okay, also it could mean a pledge.
Sean, S-E-A-N.
Right, that one I know how to spell for some weird reason. Don't ask why, I'm not sure. Never knew of anybody particularly. That's the same as John, they say. So they don't tell me what it means, I have to go find John. And that means God is gracious. Second name,
Michael.
you know that one? Champion of the Lord. Since I named one of my children Michael, I know what it means.
Tobias. T-O-B-I-A-S.
I've had so many people in classes, that's probably why I know how to spell most of the names. I don't see it. I don't know why I know it. It's just sort of strange. You'd think I'd remember people if I remember that. Yours means the Lord is good.
Then McDonald.
McDonald.
M-C.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether they consider that as a first name. They may. Do they? Yeah. It means son of world mighty. Son of world mighty. Whatever that means. Okay?
Okay.
Vicky.
Oops, I gotta get into the girls section. It means victory, which I would have guessed that, but that is what, and your other name?
Elaine.
Do you know what it means?
No, I don't.
Well, we'll find out then. I knew it was going to say see Helen, and it did. And that means light a torch. Or a woman of wisdom. Matea. What was your-
Catherine Matea. Catherine means pure, Matea means is feminine form of Matthew, means gift to God.
Right.
My name, she couldn't even let me say it. It's my name, she couldn't even let me say it.
That's
I
what she
didn't
gave it
know
to.
what it meant before I named it.
Right, she's like me, she wanted to know the meaning before. Now, we insist one of my children got named for a godfather, and so we were sort of stuck with it, and it meant lover of horses, which is Philip. So I guess in this world that just translated into sports nut, because he ended up being the editor of a daily paper, the sports editor of a daily paper before he went on to other things. And he's still a sports nut, and he even married one who's as big a sports nut as he is. So it's really remarkable. Did I miss anybody? Linda we know means lovely, and you'll have to tell me what your other name means.
Shay.
And what does that mean?
I never remember.
Oh, we'll find out. See, Catherine.
What?
See Catherine.
And didn't you just say what Catherine meant?
Pure.
That's right. Actually, pure one, they said. Not just pure, but pure one. And Christopher, which is Michael's other name, means Christ bearer, because he's the one that carried Christ.
What does Elizabeth mean?
Consecrated to God, or oath of God.
Is that the same for Elizabeth?
Hmm?
Is that the same for Elizabeth?
That is Elizabeth.
Consecrated of God? Is that what it
Consecrated to God, or oath of God, one of the two. Okay? Now, if you want to look up any other names during the break, I have all these baby books, and you're welcome to come look up names. One of them is New Age baby names. And there you are. Oh, and my name comes from Jeremiah, the male form of Jerry. And chosen of the Lord is what it means. It sort of expresses the way my life has gone. Okay? And you came late. I asked, since I had them, was there anybody that didn't want the hand or foot reflexology charts, the heavy cardboard stock ones? Okay, very good. So that's taken care of, and this is all taken care of. Now we get on with the rest of energy and magic. Magic, as I said, is about understanding the forces of the universe. The simplest form of magic that I know, absolutely the simplest form, is that you look in the mirror in the morning and you say to yourself, because remember you've all been through the triangles, right? We took you through them. Did we not take you through them, or didn't we? Well, I'll have to catch the two of you up. That's very important. We'll do that during the break, okay? But you've all taken absolute power to be who you are. Take it, no, let me do it. Don't show it to them now. They actually have a set. It's better if they work it out the other way. It really has a lot more meaning if you do it the other way. It's much more powerful. You can understand if you've been there. But you've taken on the power to be who you are, to tell your own unconscious what it will or won't do, to have this. And this is the most powerful voice you will hear on earth, is your own. Therefore, when you look in the mirror in the morning, when you're combing your hair or shaving or whatever, brushing your teeth, and you simply say to yourself, this is a wonderful day for becoming, you're programming yourself to become, to grow. You say the things you want to say. Now there is a very special technique that is also used, and it's very interesting. We just get a little piece of embroidery thread or some of the thicker thread, or even a piece of yarn, and you tie 20 knots in it. If you make it 19 or 21, you don't get shot, but 20 is the approved idea. This was taught by a man who worked in VA hospitals. He worked overseas in this country, Emmanuel Coué, Italian. You've heard the phrase many times, but it is the phrase plus the string that has all the power. And that is, every day and every way, I'm getting better and better. Every day and every way, I'm becoming better and better. And what you do is you put yourself in a room with, if you have music, it should be almost without melody. A heartbeat sound is fine. Candles, incense if you like. But actually you want to be in a place where you're not too distracted, because you're going to go into a self-imposed hypnotic state. That's the whole point of the string. And you're going to take the string in your hand, one hand, put the other hand at the top, and each time you hit a knot, you go, every day and every way I'm getting better and better. And you say it as fast as you possibly can. Don't yell it, but do verbalize it out loud. And you go down the string. Now the first time you do it, you're going to get down, and when you get to the bottom of the string, you stop. After 2, 3 times, pretty soon you won't remember going through the string. You'll remember starting because you'll go into a trance state. And your reason for having the string is so when you get to the bottom, you stop and you come back out of the trance. But it is a very powerful way of talking to yourself. We had a friend, an older woman, and she used to come out and visit regularly, and all of a sudden she wasn't coming, and her husband called us and told us she had 2 very serious problems. One was high blood pressure, and one was a heart problem. And the medicine for one would exacerbate the other, and it didn't matter which one she took, it would make the other condition worse. And at that time, she was not able to get up to fix a meal. She could barely get up and move or go anywhere. So we went out, and my husband actually worked with her. And he simply taught her this technique. Every day and every way I'm getting better and better. And he had her husband be with her to start her doing it. And she was to do it several times a day, maybe as many as 10 times. Within a week, she showed up at our house. She had gone to the store, bought the ingredients, gone home and baked a chocolate cake to share with everybody. In 1 week's time. Just from doing this. It's very powerful. And the thing is, it's very positive. If you tell yourself, now this is interesting, Dyer's latest book, The Power of Intention, very, very powerful. His talk, it's very positive. And he talks about thinking from the end, and that's right. And you envision where you're going. But you know it's where you're going, not where you are. And there's a big difference. There are people who will tell you to say, I am here. No. Because if you say, I am here, there are levels of your own inner consciousness that say, oh no, you're not. But if you say, I am going here, there is no level that will contradict you. If you say, I am becoming this, there is no level that will say, no, you can't. Which is why NLP practitioners never say you are. They always teach you to think in terms of becoming. Find the goal and think that you are going toward it, you're working toward it. This is the whole thing. And that's the thing about this particular thing. Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better. Or, as I prefer, every day, in every way, I'm becoming better and better. Okay? But you can also make, and if you like this, you can use this one and deal with specifics also. Because the lady with the heart problem also added the line, every day in every way, my heart's becoming stronger and stronger. Every day in every way, my blood pressure is coming under control. So she was doing 3 statements. She was doing the generalized one, which is very good, and then she was doing them for specific problems. So this is the kind of thing you can do. And this is real magic. And the magic here is understanding how to communicate with your unconscious, how to go into a hypnotic state so there is nothing extraneous, and how to end the trance state by getting to the end of the string. It's really very simple. So it's magic. It's real magic. Okay? One of the things, that's not the only kind of magic. The thought you have has energy. And if you think, oh, this is difficult, you make it difficult. And if you say, this is a challenge, but I can meet challenges, then you will find an answer to the challenge. If you think in terms of, I have problems, you're going to feel pretty down. But if you think in terms of, I encounter things that push me to become, then you're going to meet what we all encounter. We all encounter things that don't work. We all encounter problems. We all encounter ways of viewing the world that interfere with us. And it's up to us to create new and better ways. And we can learn to do this. We have to ask for it. We have to tell God, we have to tell ourselves, this is what we want. We have to allow ourselves to become what we can be. And some of the things we talk about are simply simple techniques for getting there. And looking in the mirror every day and starting the day that way is very good. How many of you have an alarm clock that goes, bah! Anybody? It's a terrible way to start the day. If you have a clock radio and it's programmed to rock, it's a bad way to start the day. And if you have a child and you say to the child, get up, sleepyhead, you're programming him to be sleepy for the first part of the day. What you say, what you first hear, there are two times when we are more susceptible to internal programming than any other, as we are falling asleep and as we are waking up. That's why the tape recorders that we use in going to sleep are so effective, because they hit us in this highly suggestible state. But you better be sure you know what's on it and that it doesn't have things in it you don't want. Too many tapes have things that you really don't want just because the people doing them don't know any better. What you say or hear as you are first waking up or first waking up somebody else is very important. So when somebody says to you, rise and shine, they're telling you to wake up, to have a good day. It's very important. Find music that has a melody or a station which is going to wake you up to something with a good structure. And it'll give your day structure. Some people prefer and will actually wake up to a flashing light. And there are clocks that do that. Some have chimes, all kinds of different things. Just don't wake up to, because it's a terrible way to start your day. Okay? Does this make sense? You see how simple magic is? Magic isn't complicated. Magic, real magic, is learning how the universe works and getting in touch with it. It's really that simple. And one of the things that we love to do, if you walk into a room and people are tired or they're quarreling, stand back. Take a minute and think, oh, let's fill this room with harmony, with some understanding, with Mott. And just let it flow out into the room. And it's amazing, it will have its effect on people. When you walk into a room, are people glad you're there? Some people, when they walk into a room, people are sorry they're there. Other people, when they walk in a room, people are always glad they're there. Because they bring with them qualities that people feel good around. They don't have any idea why, they just know, hey, they feel good around. Be one of those people. Create that. Create harmony. And I talked about mine. And I said, you know, I'll get to you in the break about the triangles. The two most important things we will ever share with you, no matter what classes we teach, or where, or how many, are the triangle and the idea of Mach. Have you ever had a hard time knowing whether a thing was good or bad? You thought you knew and it didn't turn out to be that way? You ever had a time knowing whether a thing was right or wrong? We all have, as long as we think in those terms, because those terms don't work. There isn't an absolute right or wrong. There isn't an absolute good or bad, and we keep thinking there is and trying to pin them down. But there is a term that if you use it, will take you where you want to go. And that's Mach. It comes from the ancient Egyptian. And there are a number of ways of writing it. And it means order instead of chaos. And if you will start looking at everything in your life, or even if you just begin by looking at a few things, in terms of Mach, you'll begin to make sense of where you're going. You'll begin to understand where you're going and what you're going to achieve. This is the most basic way of doing it. With an ostrich does it. When the ostrich, I think Michael told you, when the ostrich faces its enemies, Nothing defeats it. Even a lion won't take on an ostrich that's looking at it. Very powerful, very powerful. It doesn't bury its head in the sand, but it does put its head on the ground, and when it does that, it's vulnerable. But when it faces whatever is there, it is not vulnerable. And that is something that every god has in his hands and on his head, somewhere around him. Every time they're portrayed, the kings have it. They always put Ma'at with everything. It is the highest moral order that man has ever conceived of. The whole idea of Ma'at is, will this create order? Is this creating order or perpetuating the chaos? And the Watusi tribe about 20 years ago, I can't speak for them today, but about 20 years ago was still using a somewhat distorted, but a variation of this. And when someone did something, for instance, if someone sold a cow to someone, and the cow turned out to be ill, then the whole village would decide what had to be done. Did they have to take things back, or did he have to now give them something else, or take back some of the money? Did he have to go get somebody to treat the cow? What had to be done? And everybody would get together and come up with the ideas, and they would see and they didn't go backwards. Instead, what can be done to restore the order? And then, whoever might have to be involved, if it was somebody, a healer that had to come in, everybody had to do what it took to restore the order. And if anybody refused or failed to do it, they simply were outcast. And that was the way the ancient Egyptians did it too. The only thing you were ever guilty of is not living or acting in Ma'at. Everybody could make mistakes. Everybody could do dumb things. Everybody could be immature. But when it was seen that you had done this, you had to be willing to do your part in restoring order. And if you wouldn't, you were simply ostracized, because who wants to deal with somebody that won't deal in Ma'at? That's why their civilization lasted as long as it did.
Is that where the word ostracize comes from?
Where the word what?
Ostracize comes from? Ostrich.
Probably. Could be. I don't know. I honestly don't know, but it is possible that but that is definitely what happened. And it was and the thing is, that was the only punishment. Usually there was no punishment needed. Now they began to get corrupted too, particularly with outside influences coming in, but that's another whole story. But this is spelled with the ostrich feather, but it's spelled many other ways. And they all spell it. You can spell it with a plow. A sickle. Or a plow. An egg is frequently a part of it. And a word that means location. Yeah, the crossroads, the location. Those are all forms of Ma'at. And they're all part of Ma'at. Ma'at means harmony, justice, rightness, balance. That love which is not possessive or controlling and cannot be distorted into hate is a part of Ma'at. Ma'at always works for our growth. Ma'at is always positive in nature, and it cannot be distorted. You can rearrange Ma'at and it's just a new Ma'at. But you can only create Ma'at out of chaos. And that's what we're here for. And this is a fascinating thing. Their early mythology, I guess you'd call it, said there was all this chaos. And God came along. They didn't say where God came from. They just said God came along and found all this chaos. And he put his seed into the chaos. They actually say he masturbated. But he put his seed into the chaos and began this universe. Now that was the masculine part, the creative part of God. But God has a female part too. And that part gave order to what he created, and that's Mot. So the two aspects of God, the masculine is the generative, creative aspect, and that which gives order to it is the feminine aspect of God. We see it very simply. A man puts his seed into a woman, and in her womb she gives order to that seed as the child grows. But ultimately, the child is born, and it must complete itself. And that's what they believed about the universe, that God began the creation by putting Mot into all this chaos. And Mot by putting his seed into all this chaos, and Mot gave order to what he began. And man has one purpose that nothing else in the universe has. All my life it was something I wanted to know. I was just delighted when my husband could share this with me. I wanted to know why I was here. I've had the most remarkable life in the world. I've had a lot of garbage happen, but every time it happened, whether it was being raped when I was very young or whatever, I always got something from it. The pain was very short in duration, and always I got understanding, things I could use to help others. My whole life has been beautiful, absolutely. I feel like Solomon, that God said, because you've asked for the best thing, I'll give you everything, and I really feel like that's what I've been given. And I have. It isn't just a feeling, I really have. But this concept, I spent years saying, but when do I get to give back? Because when you have everything, what you want to do is give. It's just demanded. You can't receive this much and not give it. And I kept being told, patience, and when your children are grown. I cannot tell you how many times I was told that. Over and over and over for years. Then finally one day, hey, I got to start doing it. Teaching these classes, doing things like that. And I've never stopped, and I never will. Because it's what I want. I want everybody else to find the joy of being who they are like I found it. And the whole idea is that each one of us is a human being. In his or her great wisdom, everything in creation has its own Mot. Everything has its own nature. Spinach will be spinach. It will respond to weather and and insects and everything else. And tomatoes will be tomatoes, and palm trees will be palm trees. And St. Bernards will be St. Bernards. And cats will be cats, and fleas will be fleas. And dolphins will be dolphins. And they have a brain that has more intense convolutions in the cortex than man's. So they may have more intelligence. They have a language that's more complex than ours. But they don't have the ability to manipulate the environment, to control things. But man has. Everything in the universe, including man, must express what it is its nature to be. But man was given one particular ability and responsibility which we are not, for the most part, using. In all of creation, man alone has the ability to create order out of chaos. Everything else expresses the order of what it is. Only man can create order in our own lives first and in our environment. And that's what man is here for. Man is God's agent to complete the creation, because there's always more chaos to encounter. And that's what each of you is here for. And it finally answers what I'm here for. And it really makes such wonderful sense, and I know. And it's not what you do, because there are so many different possibilities. It's just that your whole purpose is to create order where you encounter chaos. You're going to encounter more chaos than you could ever possibly turn into order. So you're going to have to pick the chaos you work with and leave some of it for others. But isn't that a wonderful thing, to know that God created you to be his agent? in actually creating order out of the chaos that you encounter. It means no matter what happens, you see your function is to look and see what you can do to make things better. To me, that's one of the most powerful things that we could possibly know. And it's true of each and every one of us, including the ones that don't hear my words and aren't doing it. The Bible says man was given dominion over the earth. That's a very interesting word. Because if you will go back to any of your really ancient languages, you will find the meaning of dominion is well-being. That's the alternative word for dominion. Into man's hands was put the well-being of the earth. We were made caretakers, not users of it. And somewhere along the line, very immature people, and that was just because they were immature, young souls, wanted to use because they didn't know any better. The young souls really all wrapped up in the material. They don't really understand the spiritual that well. It's not their fault. It's not a matter of fault. It's the nature of where they are. But it's very destructive for the earth, particularly when technology starts blossoming long before our social sciences. Our physical sciences got way out of whack with the physical, much more powerful than those that come out of awareness and socialization. Anyway, and understanding that is part of magic. How do you feel about magic? Does it excite you as much as it does me? To me, it's the most exciting thing in the world to know that's why I'm here. And that just in little ways, whether it's recycling something, or comforting a friend, or anything that helps to create order where you encounter it, it's just incredible. And to me, that's so powerful. Anyway, if we make brownies, we always stir mott into the brownies. And you can toss it into your salad. You can cook it into your soup. You can salt it into your steak. When you cook food, when you clean a house, when you work in the garden, you can draw the words. When you're going to paint your house, before you paint it, draw a picture on the walls, or write the words love, peace, and harmony. Write a big mott feather in the same paint, then go over it. And those things are there. And they affect the people that come into that room. Because you have put this energy into the place. And they affect the people that eat the food. Because you have put the energy into that food. That's powerful, and it works. And that has to do with our intention. Our intention to create these feelings in this space. So from now on, start stirring what you want into things. And vacuuming it in, and sweeping it in, and hoeing it in. It's a marvelous thing to do. Because you begin to create these. By the way, mott, if you want it in English, it's M-A-A-T. I can't actually pronounce it. But mott comes about as close as you can get. It is sometimes spelled M-A-Y-A-T. Mayat. But ma'at is actually closer to the original Egyptian. But again, it doesn't have the full sounds that they have. But the ostrich feather, that is all. That has the whole thing. So I always stir in the ostrich feather. Are there any questions about this? I'm going to take a little break because I want to share the triangles with them. I think it's important. Since they just said this, which you all said, now I'm going to talk about the power of words, again from the ancient Egyptians. They really understood a lot. It's amazing. And we distort a lot of what they've taught us. But they still have an incredible amount of awareness. But let's face it, they invented the sciences. They invented a lot of things because they invented language. but at least the spoken or the written. Maybe there was a language before that that wasn't just telepathic and empathic. I really can't tell you, but probably. Anyway, you've all said, I have the right to be who I am, and I accept the responsibility for becoming who I can be. And I told you all I want you to say it out loud. There's a reason for this. When I was a teenager, I don't know where I got it, but I got this book that had been written by a Catholic bishop. And it was a very interesting book. And one thing he said that I started practicing, I found out absolutely made sense. Didn't know why, but I knew it worked. He said, when you pray, you don't have to yell, you don't have to be loud, but you pray audibly. Always pray audibly. Always so it is sound. Then, when I met my husband, and actually, when I sort of met him again, whatever, that's another story. Well, maybe I can tell you about it. That's in the nature of magic and all, so maybe I'll tell you tonight. I learned that what we call the unconscious, and I told you before, it's the unfocused conscious. It's not unconscious, it's more aware than the rest, and there are many, many, many levels of it, many, many layers of it. And there are layers that do not hear thought. Fascinating. Most of your unconscious hears what you think, is aware of what you think, but there are levels of your own unconscious that do not know what you think. Only what you have heard, which includes what you have said, or what you have written. They felt that hearing was more powerful than seeing, or more perfect. And there's a reason for this, and I'll even mention that if you're interested. But the power of the spoken word is that it reaches every single level of your unfocused consciousness. Doesn't miss a level, okay? This is why lying is such a mess. You think a truth, and most of you know what you want or what you believe. And then you say something that's not true. And those levels that don't hear thought accept this as what you really believe or want. Which is why when you lie, you're working at cross purposes to yourself. Part of you is working on what you said, and part of you is working on what you thought. That's why people have trouble remembering their lies. This is why they trap themselves and trip themselves up with their lies. So for pity's sakes, if you're going to lie, tell your unconscious the truth first. But you better tell it something else. You better tell it why you consider there is mock in lying. And I don't say there never is. When Michael he had no hearing for the first 5 years of his life. As a result, there were words that he did not understand. Simple, ordinary words he didn't understand when used in a new context. And I think it was the word from in math. He just did not understand when they say take this from this, and he didn't know what it meant. He didn't understand the subtraction. And I knew there was something wrong because he wasn't able to do it and he had a good mind. So I waited until one day when he got up, and I called the school and I said, Michael was sniffling this morning, so I'm keeping him home. Now I let them think he was sick. And I took that day to teach him. And then sent him back to school. It wasn't a direct lie, it was an implied lie. But my unconscious knew I was doing it. I was doing it because they weren't doing their job and somebody needed to catch him up. And it was easier not to say to them, you're not doing your job, which is not going to create an atmosphere which would make it easier for him. I mean, he had special teachers for the first few years of his life. They each chose to be his teacher because they knew he was coming in with this language barrier. But in spite of that, they still didn't know what was going on. Anyway, that's another story. But the whole thing is, there are reasons sometimes to withhold the truth. If it actually works to create mock. It's not very often. I really have very seldom in my life found a reason not to use truth. But if I have always let my unconscious know. Once in a great while, I have seen that it corrects an injustice, which it was the only way I could see to do. There may have been better ways, but at the time I couldn't see it. So remember, if you're going to lie, tell yourself the truth first. And also tell yourself why you consider lying is valid. It's the power of the spoken word. That's why what your name means is so important. That's why everything means so much. We have the sense of smell and the sense of taste, most of which simply anchor experiences for us. Sometimes let us know this is something to avoid or this is something to go to. But they don't communicate much. The three communication senses are touch, speech or hearing, and sight. Okay? Touch is the most profound of all your senses, the most unavoidable. If you want to get a deaf person to pay attention to you, just touch them lightly. If you want to bring somebody out of a trance, touch them. Whatever. Touch is the body, unless there is something physiologically wrong with you, will be more aware of touch than of anything else. But it doesn't do too well at communicating, although it is very profound and very important. I mean, the touch of a loved one, all kinds of touch, holding hands, all kinds of touch is really important. Massage. It's wonderful for particularly for bringing together. But of the other two senses, you have sight and you have hearing. And sight is the most obvious of your senses. And we are a very visually oriented culture. And we will let our sight lead us when we shouldn't. One of the fascinating things that many politicians have done, I think Reagan was a master at it. He would say something that the people didn't want to hear. He would let them know they were being screwed. But while he did it, there were images of picnics and mom and apple pie. There were these wonderful positive images. And they went with the visual image rather than what was being told to them. All of your PR men are very good at this, and they know that this is true. You can overcome hearing with sight because most people don't pay attention to the hearing. They pay attention to the obvious sense of sight. Now, Helen Keller, who's both blind and deaf, was asked by someone, if you could have one of your senses back, which would it be? And they thought she would say sight, and she said, there's no contest. I would have my hearing. And the reason she said it is because she knew the value of the two. Your hearing conveys your humanity. Your hearing conveys all kinds of things that sight alone does not. Sight shows you the material world. Hearing gives you much more. Think about this. If there's somebody you truly love, would you rather be able, if you knew for the rest of your life you could either not see them or not hear them, which would you give up? The sight of them or the sound of them telling you they loved you and sharing things with you? And if you want to know how powerful the two are, go home and turn on a TV set. And turn your back on it and listen. Whether it's cartoons or the news or a soap opera. And you will follow pretty well what's happening just with what you hear. Then turn the sound off and watch it and see how soon you get lost. Hearing communicates far more than sight, particularly in the spiritual, the emotional, the connecting part of who we are. And that's why it is the spoken word that had the emphasis in ancient Egypt. Okay? And that's a very important thing in magic to understand. Now, back to the visual. And remember, if you're drawing this in your brownies or your soup or whatever, you're also moving with touch, so you're bringing it into two senses. I had a couple that I was working with privately, and they came to me because they had a man that worked for them that helped restore apartments that they were managing. When the people left, he'd repaint and everything. And something happened in his life and he just started drinking and he was becoming worthless to himself and everybody. And so I asked, well, and his work had really slowed down. And I said, will he do what you ask him to do, even if it makes no sense to him? They said, yes, he will if he shows up. So I suggested that they write peace, sober, and we came up with a collection of things. He was to paint on every wall before he painted the wall. And within a week, he was sober. He was getting his life back on track. It's powerful. It's unbelievably powerful. Okay? Use it. Use it everywhere in your life. You think it is good, to say it's even better. And you can say it to a friend. Another thing about saying, if I say something to you, or somebody else says something to you that you don't agree with, that you don't want to buy, go out with a friend and have coffee afterwards and simply say, I don't buy this. Verbalize your disagreement. Tell yourself that you don't want to accept this. Tell yourself you think they're an idiot. Whatever. I have a thing that when I read, lots of very intelligent things are written that are really dumb. And when I'm reading a book that has very good information and I come across something that I think is dumb, I just use this symbol. It's the old thumbs down. And sometimes I highlight it to show the stupidity of it. Sometimes I just use a smile to show it was funny and an exclamation point to say it was of interest, all kinds of things. I believe in marking in books. In fact, when a friend lends me a book and it's a really interesting book, I always have to go buy another one. Because I just can't not mark it. I mean, I was taught to mark in my Bible, and if you can mark in a Bible, you can mark in anything. I do not treat my books badly, but I do mark in them. And I recommend it. Talk to yourself. Okay? Does all this make sense? Is there anything I should be talking about and I haven't remembered?
I was just thinking, it is okay to talk to yourself. Doesn't mean you're nice.
Oh no, I've been doing it for years. It's when you answer yourself.
No, answering yourself is okay too.
Oh no, that's when you're crazy, and I've been doing that for years too.
When you're crazy is when you start talking to yourself and you go, huh? Could you repeat that, please?
What is it, never argue with a fool? Listeners can't tell which is which. No, but is there anything I've left out that's important to cover? I haven't told you about the medicine wheel, so I'll tell you what.
Did you bring the baby books?
Oh yeah, we've already done that. We've done that. Actually,
Yes.
No, she's been running along rather.
by the way, in case you haven't, did you meet Drew before?
I don't think so. This is the first time I'm here.
That's what, I never know where, you've been in the other class, so all right, this is Drew. He will be doing the class on psychometry. And he's one of us. He'll be helping me with the numerology. And when it comes to the out of body, I talk about it and then he takes somebody through it. And so the first one of you to volunteer to him, he'll take. And he'll only take one during the class to go through a particular technique. So if you want to do it, you let him know. And if none of you do, then somebody else who comes in for the class can, but we always seem to have somebody who wants to do it. So.
Is everybody here part of the full course?
Yes. Yes, there was nobody signed up for this one. I did have the things on the medicine wheel. In my yard, there's a medicine wheel. It was created by a Cherokee medicine man at the time of the harmonic convergence, because I wanted a medicine wheel, and he said, okay, I'll make you a medicine wheel then, rather than go where I was going. And it was word of mouth, and 60 people showed up, and 20 people who couldn't be in town that day had left stones, and they were the first ones put in the wheel sort of define it, but they were not blessed until after the other individuals individually placed their stones. Although 4 of us did put in the direction stones for the north, south, east, and west, and then Warrigal himself put in the one for the center. The wheel is dedicated to the healing of the earth and all on it. The energy of the wheel is very, very feminine. It is about not. It is about creating order. There's just no doubt. All kinds of very feminine things have been brought into it. Not because anybody specifically asked, it's just it happens. And there are now over 500 stones in the wheel. We hope you'll all want to add your own. When you do, you ask for what it is you wish in the universe, and we strongly encourage that you ask for becoming rather than getting. We've had people ask for gettings, and some of them have received much more than they even thought they would, but I still think the wisest is that you ask for becoming. If you come, we'll show you how to walk it when he's not there. After that first year, another 60 people came during the year to put stones in it. And then there were another 40, I think, that showed up on the anniversary when he had an anniversary of it just for other new people. And since then, the stones have just been added one by one. Warrigal is now deceased. He actually died on the anniversary of Wounded Knee. He was an old man when I met him. He was older than his teeth when I first met him. But he was a beautiful healer and an old traditional medicine man. He was not an old soul, but he was a beautiful soul. And he was probably one of the best healers I've ever known. And people loved him very, very much. All of them who met him. He's a very caring man. Sometimes a silly man. And he told some of the best jokes.
I remember the story about the rug.
Oh, that was so funny. He was at a powwow. And they had blankets there for sale, or rugs. And he said, and some woman said, is this authentic? And he said, oh yes, it's made by our brothers across the great water, the Nippaho. And she bought it. But the one I always remember was the story he told. I don't know why I always remember this one, but I always remember this joke. But he always told the story of the nuns that had been out on the reservation or somewhere working in healing, and they were returning back home, and they had a rather old car, and they had run out of gas. And an old trucker comes along, driving along, sees them. They're standing by their car, and he said, sisters, can I help you? And they said, we've run out of gas. He said, well, I can give you some of mine. I think I've even got a hose that I could use, but I don't even put the gas in. They said, oh, well, we've got a bedpan. Would that work? And he said, sure, that would be great. So he takes the gas out of his truck and into the bedpan. And he says, now, sisters, I'm late. I'm really going to have to be going. And so he goes on about his way, and this other trucker driving by sees him standing there pouring this into the gas tank, and he says, now that's what I call faith. But Warrigal was a beautiful man. And the rainbow, a neighbor had called me and said, do you realize that the rainbow is coming across the sky and ends in your yard? And I said, I've never seen the end of a rainbow. You're crazy. He said, I'm not crazy. Go look. So I went out and I looked. And he was right. The rainbow was coming across the sky, and there it was, ending up in my yard. Never seen the end of a big rainbow. Little ones, yes. Waterfalls, sprays, all kinds of things. But one of these big things come across the sky, never. But as I said, my life was like I live at the end of a rainbow anyway, so I went out, I got my camera, and I took a picture. I had slide film in it. And then I really didn't know where the slide was. But I knew it had happened. And for some reason or other, I thought it ended in my front yard, in the driveway. I thought that for years. And Michael did too. I don't know why. 3 years after War Eagle put the medicine wheel in the backyard, I found the slide, and of course he put the wheel exactly where the rainbow ended. So, it was fascinating. But if you would, as I said, there are stones from Machu Picchu and yeah, Pele sent one back from a couple that are married. They went and asked for one, took one from the wheel to Pele. And Tibet, piece of the Berlin Wall has been brought there. There's stones from all kinds of interesting places. The one from the Colosseum. Most of them, even these special ones, most of them are individual stones of individual people. But most of the ones that people bring are just stones they like. Sometimes they've had it around forever. Sometimes they take it from a little pile of stones we have back there that you can use. And that's what it is. And how long ago? A number of years ago, we were going to make a trip, and that was an interesting thing. The university offered a trip out to Yellowstone, and I'd never seen the Rocky Mountains, and so I really wanted to go. And Michael and I both signed up for it, and we were all excited, and we'd gotten the camping gear to camp out and everything. About 10 days before we were scheduled to go, they let us know that not enough people signed up for it, so they weren't going to have it. And when I told my husband, who hadn't really been well at that time, I told him at work, I told him. Well, we had just come into a little bit of money, and so we had bought a truck because we figured that would last Michael for a long time. And it had only been delivered maybe 2 weeks before. He said, well, you and Michael take the truck and go. And I said, that's ridiculous. You know, I have narcolepsy. Neither Michael nor I can stay awake driving a car any distance. Just down to Whiteman and back. Somebody has to take over and drive while the other one's falling asleep. So that made no sense. So he called me back about 20 minutes later and he said, I'll drive. I won't plan it. I won't find where we eat. I won't plan where we stay. I won't load or unload the car. I'll do nothing, but I will drive it. And I'll drive you out to Yellowstone as long as you plan a route that takes you through the Black Hills and the Badlands up in North Dakota. I said, okay. But I had seen pictures on probably PBS, and knowing nothing about the distance, I really was totally ignorant of it. With my lack of visual, it's not too surprising. But I know that these pictures I had seen of Glacier were the most beautiful things I'd ever seen. I said, but could we go to Glacier instead of Yellowstone? He said, as long as you go through the Black Hills and the Badlands, I don't care. He knew the difference. He'd been stationed in Rapid City. He'd been in Yellowstone. He'd been in the Badlands. He'd been in the Black Hills, and he wanted us to see these two beautiful places that he knew we'd miss. And with all the tourists in Yellowstone, he really didn't mind missing that. Well, Charles Corral also said the most beautiful place you can drive is the Beartooth Highway. That and going to the Sun Road in Glacier are the two most beautiful places in this country that you can drive. So I found out that to drive the Beartooth Highway, you drove into the top of Yellowstone, the northeast corner. So I figured, well, okay, we'll just skip in and then back out. And so he called me back about 15 minutes later. He said, if I'm feeling well, I will take you down to Bryce. But I do not want to go to Zion because there's just too damn many tourists. Okay. As long as we can go some railroads on the way, because Michael and I love railroads, the old steam ones. And he called back 15 or 20 minutes later and he said, if we make it that far and I'm still feeling good, we'll go to the Grand Canyon. Then he called back and said, if I'm still feeling good, we'll go to Pikes Peak. We spent a month. We went everywhere. Mesa Verde, we went all these places. Plus riding the Durango-Silverton Railway, inside one way, outside the other one. We did all kinds of interesting things. But when we started off, and I will skip over some things which were really fascinating, And if anybody ever has the time, I'll tell them, and they want to listen. But we got up into the Bighorn Mountains on the way to the entrance to the Beartooth Highway. And this takes you on an old U.S. highway, which has very, very steep ascents and descents. The ones where they've got all of these places to catch trucks that are running out of control and all. And we were the typical tourists. Wish I'd had a video camera, but we didn't. We took pictures. By the way, I took 101 rolls of film. Couldn't afford to get them developed. Got back, and they sat there, and they sat there, and they sat there. And then Price Chopper had this incredible ad at Thanksgiving, and it said, "We will develop and print one roll of film for $1." I don't remember whether we filled 2 or 3 bags with our film. I paid $101 plus tax to get all those films developed.
Have they ever run that special?
Never. The universe works for me. What can I tell you? It just does these things. Anyway, but we were up in the Bighorn Mountains, and we pulled over at every sightseeing place and took pictures and looked at the view and everything. And it said, over on yonder mountain, which is Medicine Mountain, there is a medicine wheel, older than any Native American tribe. It dates back farther than any existing tribe can tell you. We knew we had to go there. And it was along the way. So I found a stone, and I meditated to connect it to me and through me to the wheel back in Belton. When we get there, there's this little tiny rinky-dink sign. It might be the kind of sign some ranchers put out there to let you know his ranch is on up the way. It just says Medicine Wheel, that's all. But we knew what we were looking for, so we drove into this, drove a long way, a mile, something like that, in. And then you get to the ranger shack with a big sign that says Medicine Wheel. By the way, this was not in any, not in AAA, not in Amoco, not in their tourist books. It was not advertised in the Colorado or the Wyoming, which it was in, but it was not advertised anywhere in any of these books that all of the states had. This last year, there were 2 write-ups and 3 pictures of it in the Wyoming tourist guide, but that year there weren't any, even though the government had taken it and made it a national monument, which is why the rangers were there. When we got to the rangers, there was about a half-mile drive up the mountain. And it's one of these rather narrow roads, sort of like they had done in the Andes, and you have to walk up. But they took one look at me and said, "Oh, well, you can drive."
She was much heavier than
Now, you have to remember, you're heavier.
Yeah, 60 pounds. But the whole thing is, at my age and all, they still decided. My husband was the one that really needed it more than me, but I'd never walked that kind of distance. Not uphill. Not for a long time. And they found it. And they said there is a Native American, actually they called him an Indian, at the top, which is why they weren't there. They were all down below. Turns out this doesn't happen too often. He had more different tribes in his heritage than any Native American I've ever met. He included Western, Woodlands, Plains, just many, many different tribes, all different aspects of the Native American culture. And he came over to us as soon as we got up, and he started telling us what a medicine wheel was. And we said, we know, because we have one in our yard. It was created by Cherokee Medicine. And he was very friendly and very nice. And both of us knew that we were there at that time for that purpose. I should go back 20 years. I'd only made 2 long trips in my life. Now I've made 3. One was out into the east. And we went to Stone Mountain, and I sat out at night while the rest of them were sleeping. First I did the laundry, and then I sat out with the moon up, communicating with the mountain. Now this is the mountain where they put the Confederate mural, like the faces up on
Stone Mountain.
Not Rushmore.
Yeah, Stone Mountain, down in Georgia, that's what it is. But anyway, like the ones on Rushmore, only this was the Confederate memorial. If you've ever been there, you can go up in an aerial tram to the top, and it's just this big, huge bare boulder that came and landed someday. And obviously from space. And all of the red earth for many, many states around all came from this impact. But Stone Mountain just rises up. And at one time, the Native Americans had placed a medicine wheel around the top of the mountain. Well, because they were putting in their park and they were putting a railroad there, and tourist railroad, and little ones like out at North Dakota. And because they were doing the carving, in their great wisdom, they took all the stones down. Well, I didn't know what a medicine wheel was at the time. I never heard the term. But I did know it was a very special spiritual thing, and I thought they had destroyed what was more important than what they were putting in. And I knew there was a way to climb up the mountain, not with the aerial tram. And when I talked to the mountain, someday I knew I would come back and walk up the mountain. I found out on this trip 20 years later that that's not the mountain I was going to walk up. Because I did end up walking up the trail up to a fire tower on another mountain, which was a part of this. And I was going 3 places on this trip, and it was the total that I had been told about 20 years before. But anyway, we're here, and he offers to unlock the gate and let me in. Well, I'm not Native American. It really didn't feel right for me to go into the medicine wheel. And the government's put a 10-foot high fence around it, so you can't. But I asked him if he placed a stone for me, and he told me he was pretty happy to. And he went with prayer and chanting and placed the stone. Then he came back to me. There were a number of other special places up at the top of that mountain, and we were all doing these other things, going in places that you could touch and be a part of. And he came over to me and said, "Wouldn't you like a stone to take back to the wheel in Belton?" Which of course is illegal, but that's okay. We both knew it was right. And I said, of course. He took a half an hour. He went to the center of the wheel, he got a stone. By the way, the wheel in the Bighorn Mountains is got 28 spokes. It's very much like a wheel along the plains of Nazca, 28-spoke wheel. And the spacing is slightly irregular. I'm sure there's a reason, but anyway, that's been lost in antiquity on both of those. Whereas the one in Belton has only the 4 spokes of the 4 directions. And he went to every point on the wheel, and then he gave me this rock to bring back to put in the center of this wheel. And so the medicine wheel is connected very much. And by the way, I said that the wheel in Belton has this feminine integrative energy. I have never felt anything like the power, the masculine, pure, raw power energy of that wheel out in the Bighorn Mountains. It's something awesome, and it's very masculine in its energy. And it was fascinating. On the day I put the stone in the wheel in Belton, the next day I was told by a friend who had been in India that they had been talking to somebody, and they said there was an incredible current that occurred. They didn't know what it was. But so we think it was that which was bringing those things together. But anyway, so that wheel's out there, and I feel like a caretaker for a piece of my own yard. And we've put down carpets and all the quadrants, and the wheel itself and the 4 spokes have earth, so that all the stones are on earth, and things grow, and every so often I pull up a lot so you can still see it because it gets unmanageable. A few trees have planted themselves, and we let a few of them grow. And one was already there, and it gets to grow, so it's a nice tall tree. And we've brought in different statues and things that we just put there because one wheel is fire, there's fire and air and earth and water. And once I get to it, there'll be a Nessie in water and there's a dragon at fire. The little unicorn garden that was there before the wheel is in the air part. And the symbol of Mott, the ostrich, will be in the earth part. Anyway, so much for all that.
How did you meet your husband?
It's not how I met him. That's not the interesting part. The only time I ever went to a ESO dance, I was out in Louisiana visiting relatives, and their best friend had a daughter about my age, and she was going with a guy out there, so I met him there. I was almost ready to go home, come back to go to college, second year, and it was. I mean, he was a soulmate, there's no doubt. But that wasn't the interesting thing about my husband. It was to me, but not to most people who know the story. He was in Saudi. And he was in Saudi, he contacted histoplasmosis. Many people in this specific part of this country get it. And it's nothing more than a cold for most people. But it got into his blood system and it came out and shattered the retina in his right eye. And at the time this happened, there was no laser surgery. And the scarring was intense and he lost everything except one little tiny dot of light way out there. That was all he had. And he was in the service. And when you lose your dominant eye, strange things happen. Your dominant eye controls the hemisphere that your basic consciousness comes out of. And you have a subdominant personality. Have you ever looked in the mirror and seen the difference between your two eyes? If there's anybody that hasn't, go home, look in a mirror, and see your face this way, and then see your face this way. You'll see two totally different personalities. The fascinating thing is the subdominant hemisphere has the same information go in as long as your corpus callosum hasn't been severed that the dominant hemisphere has, but it goes in differently. It's there, but they don't do the same things. We become civilized through the dominant hemisphere, what we call civilized. We learn the rules of society. Only the dominant hemisphere feels pain. Only the dominant hemisphere feels emotions. The subdominant hemisphere is aware of them, but does not feel them. Does not have that. Therefore, most people who, when they lose the dominant eye, end up in a mental institution for 2 or 3 years before they become totally out of control. Because you've suddenly got an adult, and what's unleashed is this subdominant, not civilized, never having felt pain, never having felt emotions, and they're coming in and flooding it, and it's just, they end up having to be someplace quiet to be able to cope. In my case, he didn't have to be institutionalized. His doctor was the one that told him that that's what usually happens. I had his conscious, and fascinatingly enough, the woman who had the very first psychic class, Marcella Kelly, through the university, and we came in and worked with her on that. But she did automatic writing. That was the thing she did more than anything else. Plus she did over the phone consultations. And she was brilliant. I mean, this woman absolutely could see what was going on in people's lives. She could describe your house, your pets. She could tell you their names, what they were eating. She was actually had this ability. Gave the worst advice of anybody I ever knew, but absolutely was the most accurate person in giving a reading, just telling you what to do with it. But she didn't know how to live her own life, so she couldn't tell you how to live yours. That was the whole thing. Sometimes you have somebody who's a brilliant counselor who doesn't see things, and sometimes you have somebody who sees things and is not a brilliant counselor, and occasionally when you really luck out, you get somebody who can do both, which Sylvia Brown was able to do. Anyway, but she all of a sudden got 2 different kind of automatic writings. And one of them, we didn't understand what it was, or all these pictures couldn't understand. It turned out it was hieroglyphics, found that out later. But we didn't recognize them. We recognized there was something, but couldn't tell what they said. And all of a sudden one day she said, your husband is going to be somebody different. Well, we knew he had been through this subdominant hemisphere. It happens that both of them are in love with me, so that works out well. That doesn't always happen. But, well, being soulmates, it wouldn't make sense that it did. And she thought it would just be another thing in this level, and she said it. And she didn't know, it was just a message she was delivering. And we didn't know either. And I had another friend, very, very gifted psychic, Lola Murray, she's now deceased. And she was almost blind. And she never saw people for what they looked like. Instead, she saw things. One person she saw as a rose, another one was a flower just beginning to open. Another one, I love this one, I don't remember who it was, but it was a rainbow with a cloud inside raining. But she said the only person she ever saw that was simply, she saw a person, was my husband. He was going through this with his toe. And and the medicine they were giving him for that, because it was so serious, was killing him. They gave him massive doses of steroids. What they call a massive dose of steroids today would be maybe a 24th of what he was being given a day. Just incredible amounts. His teeth rotted in his mouth in a matter of months, and his internal organs were being destroyed by these. And his doctor finally got him off of those. The Air Force doctor took him away from the civilian doctor that was doing it, who he'd been sent to by the Air Force, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, but we knew, and you see, I told most of you my experience of talking with God when I was 12 years old. There's so much more that you see, everything ties into everything. But it is this voice you hear, it's not like anything else in the universe. The omniscience and the omnipotence. I mean, the absolute knowing, the absolute power. There's no questioning it. It's there. It's absolutely there. The words don't mean anything. Do you have the experience? And once you've had the experience, the words don't come close. But all of a sudden one day, he's fighting. He's fighting to stay sane with the things that are going on inside him, including Kundalini experiences and everything else. And somebody else was trying to interfere in what's going on because they are hoping to take control. It was just a mess. But using subliminals, by the way. Anyway, he's standing in one room in the house, and all of a sudden this voice is coming out of him. I've heard it once before in my life. There's no, you know what it is. You just absolutely know. And it says, is it all right with you if I take over him? Why it asked me, I'll never know. Maybe just so I would know it was present and it had something to do with what was going on. I mean, I've wondered about that for many years, and that's as close as I can get to a reason. But I said, as long as he's trying to hold on, I think you have to let him. Because you see, the part that could actually do anything, couldn't handle the pain. It was a mess. And I guess that was about what was said. And then about 3 days later, all of a sudden we were in the living room, and Lola Brun was actually visiting at that time, knew what was going on with him. And I think Michael was there, but my other two sons were away in college. And all of a sudden he was in control. All of a sudden he was in absolute control of his body. He wasn't in pain. He had taken control. He couldn't heal it. The things that had been damaged couldn't be restored, but he could stop the damage right where it was. And I know the exact moment it happened. I mean, the time, the date, everything. And the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life, because both both parts of them, and actually there were three rather than two, but all of them had said if I could, that they needed me. And I'm, in a sense, I'm denying it was the hardest thing I ever did in my life, because I had to ask him who he was, because I knew he wasn't my husband. And that's, I mean, this is what he said he needed, and here I am saying, you're not him, who are you? Well, we finally figured, it took a while, but he was an older incarnation of my husband. He lived 2,000 years before my husband lived. It was the same soul, but it was a much younger incarnation, but one that had been very aware of the mysteries in ancient Egypt. One who had lived in that aspect in a very small community where he had all kinds of unusual abilities. He could look at anybody and see every life they'd ever lived and see the connections between them and the other, and the whole line of how it progressed. He didn't want to particularly, but he could. He could do many other unusual things. He could, if you had a dream, he could go look at it and tell you what was going on, what it was about. Actually, Drew can do some of these things. But here he was, and I was asking who he was. And he was an Egyptian Buddhist monk who lived during the time of Christ at a temple up at the second cataract from the Nile, in a group of 7 men that were supported by a larger monastery across the river, and I was one of the monks with him. I don't have a memory of it, but when he talked about the man, I knew, I could tell him why the man did what he did, because it was me, and he could see that it was me. But I could also explain this person some actions he didn't understand, because I understood what they are. Anyway, that's who Petra was. My husband was Cliff, and Petra is the one that taught hieroglyphics and ancient Egyptian history, and the whole thing he went through was for one purpose: to bring these teachings about Ma'at and the power of the spoken word, but especially about Ma'at to this world, a world that needed them. Now, he's not the only one that brought some of these ideas. I have met a woman that through a totally different method is teaching the same kinds of things. But before he lived either life, it was decided that he would do this in order to bring into a time which needed them these ideas. So, does that answer? I think the hardest thing for him was realizing he'd never hear his own language spoken because he couldn't even form it with the mouth he had. By the way, he was a black man in Egypt, and he used to sit under a sun lamp every day because he wanted to get darker. And he didn't like the face, he wanted to change it into what he'd look like. But then the false teeth my husband had to wear, it didn't fit, so he had to go back to looking like my husband. But there were so many funny things that happened. Things with our language and such. The one that always tickled me was, he said, "Your roads are crazy. Your roads don't go anywhere." I said, "What are you talking about?" "Of course they do." He said, "No, they don't." He said, "Our roads went somewhere. You might have a road to the temple or a road to the river, but your roads just go by places." Which gives me a chance to share with you, which wasn't his, but in one of his early classes in hieroglyphics, a man who became a very dear friend of his was in it, and another man. And the one man was always challenging the Egyptians. And they were having an argument about the roads, and this man was saying, "No, the Romans built better roads than the Egyptians," and my husband was saying, "The Egyptians built better roads." And Frank, his friend, who was he was the best punster I've ever known. Just, he would give you 6 or 7 in a row, and they would be brilliant. And he said, "Well, I don't know whether the Romans or the Egyptians built better roads, but I know who built the worst roads in the world, the French." And everybody stares at him. "Well, you know that one infamous French road builder. You see his signs everywhere. Detour." So anyway,
Yeah, And they don't go anywhere like us.
Right. Yes.
You said that he had brought these teachings out. You said there was another person. Who is the other person?
Well, she's just a woman I'm no longer in touch with. And she hasn't brought them in the Egyptian way. She's brought the idea of order. I think she has come through a path which was a very strange, it wasn't Wiccan, but it came closer to that kind of a tradition. There are Buddhists that are doing it. I really think Dyer is doing it. Sometimes they do it to scare you into it, and sometimes they do it to open you up, because some people have to be scared to be pushed onto a thing. Some people only can go if you push them. Others, if you support them, they go. And others want to seek it. It's really different. I don't know if you've heard Dyer's Powers of Intention. Very, very powerful. Very positive. And it's the same ideas. And then there's the paradigm books. And they're the ones that might scare you into going into the same path. And it's all about seeking to create order in your life and to get in touch with the field. Dyer even calls it the field sometimes, although he often calls it the source. And what John's doing with the Tachyon, it's helping people get in touch with the field. I mean, there are all these different things, but the world needs them. The world needs to get us on track. To have enough, and yet all the ancient teachings, doesn't matter whether it's Mayan or biblical or whatever, they tell you it's just enough, not the whole earth. The Buddhists do the same thing. If this small segment of humanity will get its act together and get focused, they'll bring the world along with it. And it's what it's all about. And my function was to be here for him, to help him and to carry it on and spread some of the things. I probably teach them better than he did. But he gave them to me that made more sense. That made sense out of a lot of things. So, I mean, it's just, it is what it is. The Dalai Lama's here. There are a lot of different people doing it in different places. Some whose names you've never heard. Some who have just affect little communities here and there. It's what's called in Buddhism the 10,000 bodhisattvas of the earth. Many, many more than that. Our bodhisattva's on the way to the state of Buddhahood. But the bodhisattva of the earth is one who has the right to be a Buddha. They have achieved this awareness. But they choose to come back and act at a slightly lesser level in order to help everybody else get there. I've always felt anybody who deserved to be in heaven couldn't possibly want to be there as long as there was somebody outside crying. They'd have to want to help. It just, nothing else makes sense. Any other questions? I mean, I'll answer your questions, but I really want some steak.
Well, the rest of them may have to retire to Tanner's.
If you want to talk more, you got to go to Tanner's, because that's where I am going to go. It's steak night. And I'm a meat eater. By the way, does anybody wish to join us?